On the wind-cut plateau of Vastmere, Ironcrest Interstellar Academy sat above a field of black stone and steel towers that sang when the weather turned. Luca Mercer had come there from Earth to stay in the main field response program, while most of the cadets around him came from the United Frontier Compact Worlds and already looked like they belonged in a battle line. His problem was simple and immediate. He had to survive the first day without getting marked as deadweight, because once that label stuck at Ironcrest, the Academy did the rest. The intake hall smelled like cold metal and wet fabric from travel coats. Luca stood in line with his duffel at his boots and watched broad shoulders, plated skin, thick forearms, and long-limbed cadets spread out and claim space as if the room were a test before the tests. He had seen big people before, but this was different. Here, size was not just size, and in this place it looked a lot like status. He kept his face neutral and followed the painted floor line toward registration. A wall display rolled names and assignment blocks in a steady stream, and he noticed something before he even reached the desk. The same cluster of names kept appearing near the bottom of group lists, shuffled, but still bundled in weak combinations. Luca did not call it anything yet, but he remembered it. A cadet with slate-gray skin and a thick jaw leaned one shoulder into Luca's path without fully blocking it. He was taller by almost a head and built like he had been assembled for impact. Earth? He asked, not because he did not know, but because he wanted everyone nearby to hear it. Luca shifted half a step to keep moving. Luca Mirce. The cadet smiled without warmth. Threx Anchor. He said it like a warning label. Two other cadets near him laughed under their breath, and Luca caught the pattern right away. Threx did not need to push hard. He only needed to frame the room. At the intake desk, an academy clerk scanned Luca's wrist tag and slid a slim band across the counter. Field response provisional. Main track, she said. Stormblast yard in 10 minutes. Luca took the band and glanced once more at the assignment roll. Threx was in a lead group, and Luca was in a mixed group with two names. He had already seen buried in weak brackets. It could have been random. It did not feel random. Outside, the wind hit him like a flat palm. Stormglass yards spread across the plateau in step platforms and reinforced lanes, with training pylons rising in rows and old impact scars cut into the dark ground. Cadets from several classes ringed the yard behind safety rails, waiting for the new group to embarrass itself. Luca adjusted his gloves and stepped onto the marked lane. He did not look at Threx again until he felt the stare land on him from the opposite side. Threx looked at him the way people looked at a fragile tool someone had brought to the wrong job. Luca had seen that look before on docks, in freight yards, and in mixed crews that thought Earth recruits were only useful in offices. He let it pass through him and focused on the whistle line painted on the floor. The first test horn sounded. Stormblast Yard ran, the opening evaluation in front of everyone on purpose. Luca understood that within the first minute. This was not only about numbers. It was also about sorting who would be heard and who would be ignored. The first station was reaction and movement through moving gates. Luca did not lead, but he did not freeze either. He watched the gate rhythm for one cycle, then used clean footwork and short bursts instead of trying to match the longest strides in the group. He clipped one shoulder on the last turn and heard a few laughs from the rail, but he finished upright. The second station was a paired control drill dressed up as a sparring test. No heavy strikes were allowed, but force, leverage, and balance were all part of the score. When the pairing board lit, Luca saw his name next to Threx Anchor. Of course, Threx rolled his shoulders as he stepped into the ring square. "Try not to disappear too fast," he said. Luca heard the laughter again, louder now. He planted his feet and kept his hands up. He did not answer because he needed his breath and his focus more than he needed the last word. The signal flashed. Threx moved first, fast for his size, coming in with a hard shoulder feint and a reach meant to drag Luca off center. Luca slipped the first grab and pivoted clear. The crowd made a different sound then, not respect but surprise. Threx adjusted immediately. He crowded the space and used his weight to cut off angles. Luca read the shifts and stayed alive longer than the crowd expected, but every clean escape cost him ground. When he tried to circle left, Threx trapped his wrist, turned his hips, and drove him down onto one knee inside the boundary line. The whistle blew. Luca let the grip go and stood without rushing. His pulse hammered in his ears, but he was not dizzy. He had lost the exchange. He also knew exactly how Threx set his trap on the second move and how much he relied on opponents panicking after the first collision. Threx raised one brow as if the result had proved a theory. Not scrap metal, he said. Just soft. The rail line laughed again. Luca looked past him to the scoring stand instead. Instructor Varric Thorn stood there with a tablet tucked against one forearm, long coat snapping in the wind. He was not large like Threx, but he carried himself with the kind of stillness that made cadets watch him anyway. He tapped scores in with quick motions and barely looked up. Luca noticed something that bothered him more than Threx's running mouth. Varric marked a heavy penalty under Luca's line for positional failure, but gave Threx a clean mark despite a boundary breach on the first rush. Luca had seen the boot slide, so had at least 3 cadets near the rail, judging by the way they traded glances. No one said anything. That told him more than the score. The rest of the yard circuit moved fast. Lift, carry, short sprint, precision placement. Luca was outmatched in raw power at 2 stations, but he made time back where timing and efficient movement mattered. By the end of the block, his score sat below the midpoint. When the temporary standings flashed on the far board, a low wave of chatter spread through the rails. Threx stood near the top. Luca flexed his hands once, then stopped. Anger would waste energy he needed later. He fixed the scoring pattern in his head instead. The penalties fell hardest on cadets who were already trailing, and the judgment calls always seemed to land in the same direction. That was not proof. It was enough to start. Watching. The next block moved indoors to the lattice vault, a training complex cut into the academy's lower levels. The corridor down to it was warm compared to the yard, and the metal under Luca's boots carried a hum from the systems behind the walls. He followed his assigned team through a pressure door and into a staging bay lined with route maps, climbing frames, and modular barriers. Before the exercise started, Captain Saris Holt walked the line and gave the briefing in a voice that carried without force. She was not trying to scare anyone. She did not need to. This block tests movement under changing routes, she said. Your job is simple. Get your team through the grid with all markers intact. Luca listened for what mattered. Teams, changing routes, marker integrity. That meant people who rushed to look strong could lose points by breaking formation. His group included Kale Dorn, broad-shouldered and neat in every movement, and Naira Voss, who stood with her arms folded and watched the room instead of posturing in it. Kale looked at the assignment slate, then at Luca, and the look on his face said he had already ranked the team in his head. Inside the first chamber, the route lights came up in 3 colors. One lane looked wide and easy, with smooth footing and clear sight lines. Luca watched the overhead gate tracks instead of the floor. The gate housings over the easy lane were already primed. Do not stack that lane, he said. It is going to lock if we all go at once. Kale did not even turn fully toward him. We move on green. It is a bait lane, Lucas said, keeping his voice level. Split the entry. 2 and 2. Naira glanced up at the housings, then back at the route lights, but she said nothing. Kale stepped forward on green and motioned the others in. Move. Luca moved because standing still would sink the whole team faster than being ignored. The first 2 made it through. Then the overhead bars dropped with a hard metallic snap and sealed the lane mid-pack. One marker baton clipped the barrier and bounced out of bounds. A buzzer sounded. Penalty. For 1 second, no one spoke. Then Kale rounded on Luca. You called late and crossed voices. Luca stared at him, more tired than angry. I called before you. Entered. Kale's jaw tightened. Next time, keep your head in your lane. They lost more time recovering than they would have lost by splitting entry. Luca could feel the shape of the exercise now. The system rewarded observation, but the social pressure inside the team punished anyone low status who tried to lead. That gap was where people got buried. In the second chamber, Luca kept his comments short and only when they affected immediate movement. Twice he saw the route shift before Kale did. Twice he bit back the full explanation and gave a simple warning instead. They finished the block with a mediocre score, dragged down by the early penalty. Back in staging, Captain Sarah Holt reviewed the team results with all the warmth of a weather report. She did not call Kale out for ignoring Luca, and she did not defend Luca either. But when Luca looked up from the score strip, he caught her watching him rather than the group leader. It lasted half a second. It was enough to tell him she had noticed. By evening, the Academy gathered the new intake in the Central Result Hall for the first standing board. The room rose 3 levels high with steel balconies and long light panels reflecting off dark glass. Cadets filled the floor in loose packs that mirrored the same power lines Luca had seen all day. The stronger groups clustered near the front, already talking as if the board would confirm what they had decided that morning. Provost Malencross entered from the side platform with 2 review officers and no wasted movement. The room quieted on instinct. Luca understood why as soon as she started speaking. She did not raise her voice, but every sentence carried the weight of policy. Ironcrest trains field responders for live crises across compact worlds, she said. This program does not run on effort alone. It runs on usable results. The standings board lit behind her. Names shifted into columns with score bands, qualification notes, and provisional routing. Luca found his line faster than he expected because he had already rehearsed the possibility. He was low, not at the bottom, but close enough to the cull band to feel the heat from it. Threx stood several rows ahead with his group and turned just enough to look back over his shoulder. He did not need to say much. Main, track Earth, he called lightly. Try not to fall off it tomorrow. A few nearby cadets laughed. Others did not, but no one checked him. Luca stepped closer to the side terminal instead of taking the bait. He opened the public scoring breakdown and scanned the tags attached to his block. The wording was broad enough to hide judgment inside it. Coordination disruption. Positional instability. He recognized the pattern again. The same name sat near the cull band, and the same kinds of penalties were doing the heaviest work. He raised his hand toward one of the review aides near the terminal. Can I ask what triggers a coordination disruption flag in mixed route drills? The aide gave him a polished half-smile and pointed at the scrolling criteria summary. Instructor review and observed team impact. Is there a fixed threshold? The assessment is contextual. That was an answer built to end questions without answering one. Luca nodded as if satisfied and stepped back. He could feel Threx's attention on him, waiting for a reaction worth repeating later. He gave him none. Anger would be public, and observation could stay private. As the crowd broke apart, Luca stayed long enough to study the lower score bands one more time. 3 names kept recurring in weak assignments across the day, his included. That could still be coincidence. But coincidence did not usually line up so neatly with discretionary penalties and bad pairings. When he finally turned from the board, the hall had thinned. Naira Voss stood near a railing 2 levels up, looking down at the same results display. Their eyes met for a moment. She did not smile or signal, but she did not look away first either. Luca headed for the dorm corridor with the cold of Vastmere already pressing against the glass walls beyond the hall. He had not won anything that day. He had lost in public, been laughed at, and landed too close to the cull line for comfort. He also had something he trusted more than comfort. A pattern. He was not ready to accuse anyone, and he was not going to waste his one shot at staying in the program on a guess. For now, he kept his plan narrow. Stay in the main track. Keep watching. Collect enough proof that the next person who tried to wave him off could not do it with one. Vague sentence. Behind him, the standings board cycled to the next class block, and the names shifted again. Luca kept walking. Luca's second day at Ironcrest started underground in the lattice vault, and he went in with one clear task before the doors even opened. He needed to get through the simulation without letting someone else's setup pin the blame on him again. After the first standings board, he knew 2 groups were already moving against each other in practice, if not in name. Luca was trying to stay in the main program, and the stronger cadets around Threx Anchor were working to keep him low. The staging bay lights were colder than the day before, and the room was louder with confidence. Cadets who had scored high in the first block stood close together and talked like the next run was already theirs. Luca stayed near the side rack, checked his gloves, and watched the route board instead of the crowd. Instructor Varek Thorne handled the group assignments himself this time. He stood at the front rail with a tablet in one hand and called names in a clipped voice, then pointed each team toward a different gate. When Luca heard his own name paired with Threx and Pelruin, he did not react on his face. He only felt the pattern click into place again. Pel grinned when he joined Threx's side. Good. We need someone to soak the penalties. Threx did not laugh out loud. He gave Luca a flat look and jerked his chin toward the gate. Stay where you're told, and maybe we won't lose time cleaning up after you. The chamber beyond the gate was a broken terrain layout with angled platforms, narrow catwalks, and moving partitions that slid across the course in time bursts. Luca listened to the start briefing and locked onto what mattered. The team had to carry 2 marker cases across the route and tag 3 checkpoints without dropping pace. That meant the fastest route was not always the safest one. The start horn sounded. Threx took the lead marker and set a hard pace immediately, then steered the group toward a split where one side narrowed into a rib passage barely wide enough for one cadet at a time. He did not ask. He pointed at Luca. You. Narrow lane. Carry the second case. Luca saw the trap at once. The lane forced single-file movement and had poor sight lines, which meant if a partition shifted early, the person inside would lose time and block the route behind him. The left run is unstable, he said. We should rotate the case through center. Threx kept moving. Move. Luca moved because refusing would give them a clean reason to write him up. He ducked into the narrow lane with the marker case braced to his chest and heard Pel mutter, something amused behind him. The passage was tighter than it looked from outside, with crossbars overhead and side panels that pulsed with warning lights before each shift. He counted one cycle, then another. The partition timing felt wrong. The first panel slid late. The second came early. Luca twisted sideways to keep the case clear and took a hard scrape across his shoulder guard, then pushed through before the lane sealed. By the time he cleared the choke point, Threx and Pel were already at the first checkpoint and shouting for pace. Luca ran the case up and passed it over. The handoff landed clean. Then a rear partition in the lane he had just exited slammed shut out of sequence and triggered a route penalty because the course flagged the lane as blocked during active transfer. Pel rounded on him first because it was easy. What did you do? Luca kept his breathing steady. The timing shifted early. Threx's mouth tightened with that same practiced contempt Luca had seen in the yard. Funny how it shifts when you're in the lane. They pushed on before Luca could answer, and the rest of the run turned into damage control. Twice more the obstacles pulsed in patterns that did not match the preview sequence, and twice Luca had to improvise just to keep the team moving. He got them through a drop section by bracing the marker case under a rail and sliding down after it, then caught Pel's missed grip at the second checkpoint before the case hit the floor. None of it changed the team's story about what happened. When they crossed the finish line, the score strip flashed a time loss and 2 route penalties. Threx handed his marker in like he had just been forced to drag dead weight uphill. We were clean until the narrow lane. Luca did not argue in front of the hole. He looked at the route replay panel instead. The obstacle pulses in that lane had repeated a spacing pattern from yesterday's gate lock. Not exact timing, but the same kind of staggered mismatch that looked less like randomness and more like a hand on the controls. Threx noticed where he was looking and gave a small, cold smile. Still hunting excuses? Luca met his eyes for a beat, then looked back at the panel. No, patterns. He said nothing else. By the time the next team loaded in, he had already started memorizing the order of the batch shifts. After the simulation block, Luca cut through the cadet rest corridor instead of going straight to the mess line. He needed quiet more than food, and he needed a place to lock down what he had seen before the details blurred together. The corridor opened into a small equipment room annex with drying racks, maintenance benches, and a narrow window strip looking out at Vastmere's gray sky. He chose the far bench, pulled a small waterproof notebook from his bag, and started writing by hand. He mapped the lane sequence first, then marked the abnormal shifts with short notes in plain terms he could read fast later. Late panel. Early seal. False safe pulse. He was not trying to prove a theory yet. He was building a record that matched what his eyes had seen. The door hissed, opened behind him. Naira Voss stepped in carrying a pair of gloves and a coiled training strap. She paused when she saw him writing. Her posture stayed guarded, but she did not turn around and leave. I thought people from Earth were supposed to complain louder, she said. Luca kept the notebook open. I tried that yesterday in my head. It did not help. Naira moved to the next bench and set down her gear. What are you writing? Things that repeat. She looked at the page, then at him. That lane went bad on you. It went bad before me, Lucas said. He tapped one line with the back of his pen. The warning pulse came in late, then the partition fired early. In a fair run, those stay in order. Like a traffic light and a gate. If they swap, somebody gets trapped or blamed. Naira leaned closer, not enough to crowd him, just enough to read. You track this. From memory. Luca nodded. I do better with patterns than with speeches. That almost pulled a smile from her, but she kept it small. Kale thinks the system is too heavily tested for this kind of error. Maybe he is right, Lucas said. Maybe it is random. But if it is random, it should hit everyone. It keeps landing where the same people are already exposed. Naira was quiet for a moment. The room hummed around them, and rain or ice tapped lightly against the outer pane. You called the lock in the team drill yesterday, she said. I saw the gate housing. I did not say anything. Luca capped the pen and looked at her directly for the first time in the room. You do not have to take my side. I'm not taking your side, she said, and then added, more honestly, not yet. That was more than he had expected. She picked up one glove, then set it down again. If you are right, what do you do with this? Keep watching, Lucas said. Keep it simple. If I talk too early, it sounds like I'm trying to protect my score. Naira glanced toward the door, then back to the notebook. Show me the next one when it happens. Lucas studied her face for any sign she was joking. He did not find one. All right. She lifted her gear and headed for the door. Before she left, she stopped with one hand on the frame. For what it is worth, Pell dropped that checkpoint grip. You saved it. Luca gave a short nod. Threx will still say I caused the penalty. Naira looked back once. Threx says a lot of things. The door sealed behind her, and the room felt different after she left. Luca was still alone in the problem, but not completely unheard anymore. He reopened the notebook and added a new line at the bottom of the page. Naira noticed the lane. Then he tore the page edge clean where the paper had snagged on the bench and kept writing. The next major block ran as a multi-level rescue simulation in the lattice vault, and Luca went in with one aim he could measure. He needed to show what he was actually good at in a scenario built around coordination and getting people out. If the course stayed fair, he could make ground. If it did not, he needed witnesses. Captain Saris Holt gave the briefing from the lower platform this time, while instructor Varek Thorne monitored the route controls above. Treat this as a live extraction drill, Saris said. Your score comes from team movement, civilian marker recovery, and safe routing under changing conditions. That was Luca's kind of test. The training layout represented a damaged service block with stacked corridors, lift shafts, and side rooms marked as trapped zones. Each team had to retrieve weighted dummy markers and move them through a sequence of doors that were supposed to cycle in safe order. Luca listened to the door logic summary and reduced it to what mattered in his head. If the side door opened before the main gate sealed, the path was clear. If the order flipped, the route could pinch. His team was different this round, but the pressure felt the same. Cale Dorn had de facto control again because others trusted his confidence, and he kept the group on a fast pace through the first level. Luca did not challenge him early. He saved his voice for moments that affected outcomes. At the second level, they reached a junction with 2 transfer doors and a short side hall leading to a marker room. The side door flashed green before the main gate finished cycling. Luca stopped short. Wait, that order is wrong. Cale was already moving. It is a timed route. Luca pointed, keeping his voice tight and plain. If we send someone through now, that gate can close on the return. Take the main first. One cadet behind them hesitated. Another looked up toward the control windows. Varek's voice came through the overhead speaker, dry and impatient. Cadets, continue the drill. Do not freeze on routine timing variants. Routine variants. Luca felt his jaw set. The sequence in front of him was not a cosmetic glitch. It changed who could get in and out safely. Captain Holt, He called, not shouting, just making sure the lower platform could hear him. That side door is cycling wrong. There was a brief pause under the vault's hum. Then Varek cut in again before Saris answered. Continue the drill. Kale swore under his breath and sent Pell into the side hall with a marker sling. Pell made it in. Luca watched the main gate track, counted the half-beat drift, and moved before he had time to argue again. The main gate started to close early. Luca lunged, caught the edge bar with both hands, and braced his weight just long enough for Pell to duck back through with the dummy marker. The gate drove down harder than expected and shuddered against Luca's shoulder guard before the safety rebound kicked in. Pell stumbled clear, dropped to one knee, and clutched the marker to his chest like he had barely remembered to hold on to it. The room went dead, quiet for a second. Then alarms chirped a soft caution tone. Kale stared at the gate, then at Luca. You said it would pinch. Luca let go slowly and rolled his shoulder once. Pain, but nothing serious. I said the order was wrong. From the lower platform, Captain Saris Holt stepped closer to the safety rail and looked up toward the control level before looking back to the team. Her expression did not change, but Luca saw the shift in her attention. She was no longer treating this as normal course friction. Varek's voice returned over the speaker, sharper now. Reset and continue. Minor cycle lag. No asar. No one on Luca's team looked convinced, but the drill resumed because that was what Academy cadets did under authority. They finished the block with a salvageable score, though slower than planned. The near traps spread through the staging bay before the teams were even dismissed. Luca heard the story dividing the room as he stripped off his gloves. Some cadets said he overreacted and got lucky. Others had seen the gate rebound and gone quiet. Naira, 2 benches over, met his eyes once and gave the smallest possible nod. That mattered more than the chatter. By the end of the session, the incident had already been reduced in public talk to a timing wobble. Luca could feel how quickly the place wanted to smooth the edges off what had happened. But he had seen Saris look up at the control level before Varek spoke. He wrote that down too. Not proof yet. Closer. The second standings release came at the end of the cycle, and the whole academy seemed to know what it meant before Provost Malencross said a word. The first board had sorted people. This one started cutting lanes. The results hall felt tighter than before, even though the room was the same size. Cadets packed the floor in harder clusters, talking low until the side platform lights came on. Luca stood near the outer rail this time, where he could see both the board and the exits. He was not trying to look confident. He was trying to stay clear-headed long enough to read what the academy was actually doing with him. Malencross stepped to the platform and let the room settle itself. Provisional standings are now tied to advancement eligibility, she said. Some of you will move up. Some of you will be redirected. Redirected was a clean word for losing the program you came for. The board lit. Luca found his name and felt a hard, cold drop in his stomach before he could stop it. He was still in the main track band, but barely. One more bad block, and he would be routed out of the field response stream before the large inter-team test even began. A laugh broke from the front cluster before the room finished reading. Threx did not need a shout this time. He just turned enough for nearby cadets to hear him and let the words carry. They kept him in. Good. Bigger audience when he folds. Pell snorted beside him. A few others joined in because that was what crowds did when someone high-ranked set the tone. Luca let the noise pass and looked at the detail tags on his scoreline. There was again broad penalties, soft wording, heavy effect. The rescue block had also logged a note about disruption under instructor direction, which meant the system had registered his warning as a conduct issue, not a safety concern. He waited until the formal release ended and the crowd began to break, then moved along the side corridor that led toward the instructor access doors. He was not trying to confront Varek. That would have burned him alive in this place. He was trying to reach the one person who had actually looked at the gate event like it mattered. Captain Saris Holt came out of the side passage with a stack of slates under one arm and 2 cadets trailing behind her. Lucas stepped aside to let them pass, then spoke when the path cleared. Captain Holt. She stopped and turned, not impatient, just alert. Mercer. Luca kept his voice low because the walls carried. Something is wrong. In the vault simulations. not just random glitches. The door order today was wrong before we touched it. Saris watched him for a beat that felt longer than it was. You're saying that as a cadet trying to protect a score? Or as someone who is sure of what he saw? Luca answered without dressing it up. Both, maybe. I need the score. But I know what I saw. That earned the smallest shift in her expression. Almost approval, almost caution. Good answer. She adjusted the slates in her arm and glanced once toward the inner passage where staff traffic moved behind the glass. When she looked back, her voice was lower. Keep your head clear, Mercer. Do not chase the crowd. Do not chase Threx. Show me what you do in the inter-team test. Luca held on to the part that mattered. I'm still in that test. You are, Sarah said. Do not waste it. She turned to go, then stopped half a step away and added, and if you see a bad cycle, call it once. Plainly. Make it useful. Then she was moving again down the passage, and Luca stood there with the corridor lights buzzing overhead and the noise of the dispersing hall swelling behind him. She had not confirmed anything. She had not promised protection. She had kept him in. That told Luca more than reassurance would have. Saris wanted to see what happened under real pressure, with witnesses and stakes high enough that a bad pattern could not hide in routine chatter. When he returned to the main hall floor, Threx was still there near the front with his group, playing to the people around him like the next block was already written. He saw Luca and gave him a slow grin. Still standing, Earth? Threx asked. Luca stopped just long enough to answer. Long enough to make you work for it. The grin thinned, not gone but changed. Luca did not stay to read it. He headed for the dorm corridor with his notebook in his pocket and the next test already taking shape in his mind. He was still on the main track, barely. The academy had not buried him yet, and Threx now had a bigger stage for the humiliation he wanted. So did Luca. Luca entered the inter-team test in the lattice vault with one goal he could. Control, and one he could not. He could control how clearly he moved and how useful he was under pressure. He could not control who Ironcrest put beside him, and when the roster flashed on the staging wall, the academy handed him the worst combination in the room. He was assigned with Threx Anchor, Kale Dorn, Pel Ruin, and Naira Voss. The staging chamber buzzed with voices as cadets checked harness straps and route slings. But Luca heard almost none of it after reading the list. The large inter-team test mattered because it was one of the few blocks where everyone watched the same teams at once. If he failed there, he would fail in public, and the next standings board would likely finish the job. Captain Saris Holt gave the operational briefing from the lower floor, while several instructors watched from the control gallery above. This is a live response style team exercise, she said. You are moving through a multi-zone failure layout with retrieval, transfer, and extraction tasks. Your score is based on outcomes, not volume. That last line drew a few thin smiles around the room. Luca did not look at anyone. He was studying the route model projected on the wall and reducing it to simple terms. Multi-zone meant doors and elevation changes. Transfer tasks meant bottlenecks. Bottlenecks meant a team could fail faster from ego than from bad terrain. They moved to the ready gate in a tight line. Threx stood at the front like the role had already been given to him. Kale positioned himself just behind him, alert and disciplined, while Pel hovered close enough to copy whatever the top two did. Naira stayed half a step off the line, watchful as always. Luca took the rear and used the short walk to make one attempt at building a plan before the gate opened. We need clean rolls before we go in, he said, keeping his voice plain and brief. Threx clears path. Kale handles timing calls. Naira watches side shifts. Pel carries first marker. I track route changes and fallback. Threx glanced back with open contempt. You are assigning jobs now. Luca did not rise to it. I'm trying to keep us from tripping over each other. Kale answered before Threx did. Team lead calls assignments at entry. That is Threx. Naira looked from Luca to the route model and then back to the gate. She said nothing, but Luca caught the way her eyes paused on him for a fraction longer than before. The ready light went amber. Luca looked up through the safety mesh at the control gallery out of habit more than hope, and that was when he saw it. Instructor Varek Thorne leaned over a side console and keyed a manual input on a route panel separate from the main timing board. The motion was quick and partly blocked by a rail strut, but Luca knew what he had seen because he had been watching Varric's hands for 2 days. A manual route touch. He had no proof of what it changed and no time to explain. The gate light flipped green. Threx stepped through first. Stay in line and keep up. Luca followed the others into the deep lanes of the lattice vault, where the air turned warmer and the walls carried a constant mechanical hum. The team's mood was wrong before the real pressure even started. They were moving like 5 people running separate arguments inside one formation. That was the kind of team a bad system could break fast. By the time they reached the deeper levels near East Relay Corridor, Luca's priorities had narrowed to one thing. He needed to keep the group from making a bad situation worse. The route had started unstable, then turned erratic in ways he had seen before. If he could keep people from panicking and forcing the mechanisms, they might still get out clean. The corridor was narrower than the upper lanes, with ribbed walls, service lights, and a graded floor over maintenance channels. Their team had just cleared a transfer room when the next junction failed in a hard cascade. The main floor locks engaged with a heavy clunk under their boots. The side route panel went dark, and the directional beacons began pulsing conflicting arrows down 2 different halls. Pell stopped first. What is it doing? Kale moved to the route panel and slapped the reset touch twice. Nothing changed. Side path is not responding. Threx stepped to the sealed gate and grabbed the emergency release bar with both hands. Then we make it respond. Luca saw the problem before Threx finished the first pull. The lock assembly was already misaligned from a bad cycle. Force might bend the external release linkage enough to jam the Gata harder. Stop, Lucas said. Do not pull that. Threx ignored him and heaved again. Metal shrieked inside the frame. The gate shifted less than an inch, then snapped back into the housing with a harsher lock tone. Luca felt anger spike and forced it down because anger would slow his words. You just drove the latch deeper, he said. Leave it. We need another route. Threx turned on him, breathing hard. Then show one. Luca moved past the argument and checked the wall indicators in order instead of all at once. Floor lock active. Main gate jammed. Side panel dead. Beacon drift. It looked chaotic if he read it as separate failures. It looked familiar if he read the sequence. The errors were stepping through the same staggered pattern he had tracked in his notebook. He looked toward the ceiling camera dome, then toward the service seam along the left wall. This is not random, he said, mostly to himself, then louder so the team could use it. The route is being pushed out of order. We stop forcing doors. We move on with still answers. Kale frowned at the drifting beacon lights, torn between training and what he was seeing. The procedure says hold position and wait for control reset. Naira finally spoke, her voice steady despite the alarms. The control reset is not coming. The floor shuddered under them, a short grinding vibration from below. Pell took one step back, and his heel slipped into the half-open gap of a transfer plate that had failed to seat flush after the lock sequence. His leg dropped hard to the knee with a sharp metallic bang, and he pitched sideways into the narrow seam between the plate and the frame. He caught himself with both hands before going deeper, but the plate pinched across his lower leg and held. Pell's face went pale under his skin tone. I'm stuck. Everything in the corridor tightened at once. Threx crouched and grabbed Pell's arm by reflex, then looked at the jammed plate and swore. Kale reached for the emergency panel and found another dead touch strip. Luca dropped beside the gap and took one look before speaking. Pell's leg was trapped by pressure and angle, not by damage Luca could see. If they yanked him wrong, they could lock the plate harder or put Pell into shock. No one pulls. Yet Lucas said, we free the plate first. Threx's head snapped toward him. We do not have time. Luca met his eyes for one hard beat. You want him out or not? For the first time since the gate opened, Threx did not answer immediately. The alarms kept pulsing, the beacons kept lying, and Pell's breathing got faster in the gap. The team sat there on the edge between fear and pride, and Luca felt exactly how fragile the next few seconds were. At the transfer seam, Luca's focus narrowed to one thing. He had to get Pell free before the next system shutter locked the plate tighter. If he could do that, he might also force the team to work like a team for the first time. The corridor lighting dipped, and came back. Metal ticked in the wall behind them. Luca set one hand on the transfer plate and felt the vibration pattern through his glove, then looked for the manual relief notch he remembered from lower-level maintenance diagrams shown in class. It was there, half hidden behind a bent edge strip. "I need space, and I need you to listen," he said, fast and clear. "Naira, light on this seam. Kale, hold Pell steady at the shoulders and keep him from twisting. Threx, when I say lift, you lift the plate edge only. Not before." Pell swallowed hard. "What if it drops again?" Luca kept his voice flat on purpose. "Then we do it faster than it drops." Naira was already moving. She snapped a hand lamp from her harness and angled the beam tight into the seam without flooding Luca's eyes. Kale shifted behind Pell and braced him under the arms, his movements precise now that he had a specific task. Threx hesitated for one visible second, then planted both hands on the plate edge and set his feet. Luca slid his fingers into the relief notch and found the recessed mechanical catch. It was stiff, either damaged or deliberately overtensioned. He did not have the leverage for a full release by hand. He looked at Naira's strap clip, then at the bent lip near the notch. "Naira, give me the strap hook." She passed it without asking why. Luca threaded the hook through the notch opening and used it as a pull handle while bracing his shoulder against the frame. The catch shifted a fraction, then stuck. The wall gave another low shudder. "Now, Threx," Luca said. "Lift." Threx heaved. The plate edge rose just enough for the catch to clear one tooth with a loud snap. Pell cried out and nearly twisted, but Kale locked him in place exactly as instructed. "Hold him straight," Lucas said. "Pell, do not fight it. Push with your hands on my count." He reset his grip on the hook and felt the catch give a little more. In that tight angle, with Naira's light on the seam, he saw something that did not belong on a routine training module. A service cover on the control side had been reseated badly, and beneath it a small access strip showed fresh scoring around the screws, like someone had been in it recently and fast. Naira saw it at the same time. Her light flicked once to the exposed edge and back to Luca's hand. Her voice dropped. That panel was opened. Luca did not answer because he could not spare the breath. He pulled the catch the rest of the way and shouted the count. "Now, push, lift." Pell shoved with both palms. Threx lifted. Kale dragged from above in one clean motion, and Luca guided the trapped leg through the seam before the plate slammed back into place with a punishing clang. Pell rolled clear onto the grating and lay there breathing hard, both hands over his face for a second before lowering them. He was shaken, but he was out. Luca checked the leg quickly with his eyes and hands for alignment and movement, then gave a short nod when Pell flexed the ankle and knee. "No break that I can see," Lucas said. "Pain and bruising. You can move." Pell looked at him differently now, like he had just realized the person he mocked might be the reason he was still in the test. "Yeah," he said quietly. "I can move." The corridor fell into a strange silence after that, not because the alarm stopped, but because the argument did. Threx was still crouched by the plate, breathing hard, his hands braced on the metal. He looked from Pell to Luca, and for the first time there was no smile anywhere on his face. Naira closed the hand lamp, then opened it again and angled it low so only Luca could see the seam. "You saw it too," she said under her breath. "Fresh tool marks." Luca nodded once. Later, he stood and looked at the team in a quick sweep. Pell rattled but mobile. Kill focus now. Naira ready. Threx angry, but not blind anymore. That was enough to move. In a short service hall beyond the jammed junction, Luca focused on one thing for the next minute. He needed to keep control by being useful, not by winning a status fight. The system was still running out of rhythm somewhere behind the walls, and they needed to get a living team out before the next bad cycle trapped someone else. If he made the plan short and practical, even Threx would have trouble rejecting it. They moved through a narrow maintenance crossover that Lucas spotted behind a half-marked panel seam. He had seen the route kind in training diagrams and only tried it because the main corridor was compromised. The passage opened into a service hall with lower ceilings, cable trunks along one wall, and a maintenance hatch indicator that still showed green. Luca stopped them there because it was the first place in minutes where no one was pinned, shouting, or forcing a door. "Listen," he said. "We are done pretending this is a normal route." Threx straightened to full height, still breathing hard. "Do not start giving speeches." "I am not," Luca said. "I'm giving jobs." He pointed as he spoke, so no one had a guess. "Naira, you watch route lights and call any bad sequence before we enter a choke point. Kale, you handle timing and body position at doors. You're good at keeping movement clean. Pell, you stay center and carry nothing heavy until that leg settles. Threx, you clear obstructions and hold mechanical loads when we need strength. I will read the route and pick the next turn." Kale opened his mouth, then shut it again because every assignment matched what they had just seen with their own eyes. Pell did not object at all. He was still testing weight on the trapped leg and trying not to limp. Naira was the first one to answer out loud. "That works." The words landed harder in the hall than Luca expected because they came from someone who had stayed neutral all day. Threx looked at her, then at Luca, and Luca could almost see the calculation behind the anger. Threx still wanted a lead. He also now had proof that brute force and pride had nearly left Pell stuck in a plate seam. Naira stepped closer to Luca and kept her voice low enough that only he could hear the next part. "Your notes, the gate pattern, and that access strip. This is not a rough test. Somebody bent the rules." Luca felt the truth of that settle in his chest, heavy and cold, but he stayed on the immediate problem. "Then we live long enough to show it." A distant lock thudded somewhere ahead, followed by a staggered pulse of route lights that ran down the service wall in the same broken timing he had memorized. Luca recognized the sequence and pointed to the maintenance hatch before the second pulse fired. "That one," he said. "Now, we move before the next drift." Kale moved first to the hatch wheel and glanced back once for confirmation. Luca gave a short nod. Kale spun it, and Threx took over for the final heavy turn without comment. The hatch opened onto a ladder drop and a lower relay walk that bypassed the failed junction. Pell looked at the ladder, then at Luca. "You called that from the light pattern?" Luca grabbed the top rail and checked the first rung. "I called it from the pattern, trying the same trick twice." Threx stood beside him at the hatch, close enough that Luca could feel the heat off his gear in the tight hall. When he spoke, the mockery was gone, replaced by something rougher and harder to read. "You lead the route," he said. For now, it was not respect yet. It was not surrender either. But it was enough. Luca started down the ladder first, not because he wanted the symbol of it, but because someone had to go where the team could still see and follow. Behind him, he heard Naira calling the next light cycle in a calm, clipped voice, Kale passing down movement timing, and Pell taking the ladder carefully with Threx spotting his bad leg from above. The team finally sounded like a team. And somewhere above them, in the control levels of Ironcrest, someone had touched the route by hand. Luca led the team out of the ladder drop and into East Relay Corridor because that was the only way to keep them moving as one body. He needed to get 4 other cadets through a corridor that no longer followed training rules without letting panic or pride split them again. The corridor stretched longer than the route map suggested, with relay housings set into the walls and layered doors that opened on staggered timing. The light strips were still running in that broken pulse Luca had memorized, and every wrong pulse meant a door could close early or a floor plate could lock under someone's foot. Naira stayed near Luca's shoulder and called the light shifts as they came. Kale counted movement beats at the doors in a clipped voice that sounded calmer now, because he was doing a job he understood. Pell limped but kept pace in the center, and Threx brought up the rear for half the corridor, silent and watchful in a way Luca had not seen from him before. At the first layer door set, the timing drifted again. The outer leaf opened halfway and stopped while an inner brace arm extended too early, turning the gap into a trap that would jam if anyone tried to force through. Threx stepped up at once. "I can rip the brace back." Luca shook his head without turning. "Not rip. Hold it on my mark so Kale can cycle the latch." Threx made a low sound that could have become an argument, but Naira cut him before it did. "He is right. The arm is loaded. If you yank it, it locks hard." Luca moved to the side panel seam and watched the pulse count in the relay light reflection on the metal. The corridor gave him the same broken rhythm as before, but now he had hands that would follow instructions. Threx, brace under the joint and lift only when I say. Kale, when the light drops, hit the latch touch once. Pell, stay back. Naira, call the next pulse. Naira watched the strip and raised her voice a fraction. One more. Ready. Luca waited for the dip and pointed. Now. Threx lifted with controlled force, not a wild pull. The brace arm rose just enough for Kale to tap the latch and clear the catch, and the door leaves slid apart with a grinding protest instead of full lock. Pell stared at the opening like he expected it to betray them again. Move, Lucas said. Single file. We do not. Stop in the throat. They slipped through before the pulse returned, and the doors snapped shut behind them with a heavy hit. Threx looked at his own hands, as if he was surprised that controlled strength had worked better than anger. The next stretch narrowed around relay towers and overhead service trunks. Luca kept the route calls short and practical because long explanations were useless in a bad corridor. He told them where to place their feet, which turn to ignore, and which door to trust for one cycle only. That was enough to keep them alive and moving. At the far end of East Relay Corridor, they reached a split where the standard training escape route should have remained open all session. Every cadet knew that route because instructors used it to prevent pileups when simulations broke flow. Luca had never needed to use it before, but he knew the sign color and the door shape on sight. The escape route hatch was sealed. Not delayed. Not slow. Sealed early with a red mechanical lock pin set through the wheel hub. Kale stopped first and stared at it. That route is not supposed to lock during active teams. Pell looked from the hatch to Luca. Can they do that? Luca stepped close and checked the pin housing without touching it. The lock pin was seated clean, not bent by failure. Someone had set on purpose. Not by accident, he said. Threx's jaw tightened. So this whole run is a setup. Luca did not answer the accusation because he still only had pieces, not a finished picture. He pointed them toward a maintenance bypass on the right wall and kept them moving before the corridor could punish them for standing still. As they turned into the bypass, Kale spoke from behind him in a voice Luca almost missed because of the relay hum. Luca, which way after this hatch? It was the first time Kale had called him by name. Luca did not look back. Down one level, then left at the coolant manifold. We use the service walk and avoid the next main doors. He heard no mockery after that. Only boots moving in time. In the auxiliary maintenance sector, Luca's goal shifted again. He needed proof they could carry out with them. If they reached control with nothing but stories, the Academy could bury the incident. Under a clean explanation, he needed something simple and physical that showed the route had been tampered with on purpose. The maintenance sector sat behind a low hatch and a short crawl height connector that opened into a cramped service bay. It smelled like warm dust and machine oil, and the wall panels there were plain utility metal instead of Academy finished training shells. That made the damage easier to read. Naira crouched beside the first relay, housing Luca pointed out, and ran her hand lamp across the access edge. Fresh scrape marks flashed near the fasteners, and a seal strip sat crooked where it should have been flush. Luca saw the same pattern he had noticed near Pell's trap plate, only clearer in that light. Pell leaned against the wall and kept weight off his sore leg. If we stay here too long, they could say we broke it while hiding. They will say that anyway if we bring nothing, Lucas said. Kale turned toward the entry hatch, listening for movement in the corridor beyond. Then what counts as enough? Luca gave the answer in plain terms because he needed all of them aligned in one sentence. Something that shows the panel was open during this run and the route settings were changed from training standard. Not a theory, a mark and a record. Naira looked up at him and nodded once. I can get the service stamp from the access strip if the local log is still cached. He kept it simple for Pell and Kale. That means a timestamp and a permission mark. It tells us who touched this panel class, or at least what level they used. Threx folded his arms, then immediately unfolded them because the space was too tight for posturing. Do it fast. Naira popped the access cover with a slim maintenance pick from her kit, not breaking anything, just lifting the misseated edge. Luca held the panel while she angled her lamp and wrist pad toward the local service strip. The screen reflected in her eyes as she scrolled. The console displayed a line that read Route Override Accepted Naira said quietly as she read it aloud for the group. She kept going before anyone could interrupt. Another line shows the access class. Training command tier. Kale's face changed first. The idea of a random glitch had given him emotional cover. A training command. Tier mark took that cover away. That is not cadet level. Luca watched Naira copy the short local cache block and then photograph the scrape marks, seal edge, and mismatched screw seating with a wrist pad. He did not need her to explain how the file worked. The value was obvious and practical. It was the difference between being dismissed and being heard. Pell swallowed and glanced toward the hatch again. If this points at an instructor, they can crush us. Naira looked up from the panel. If we walk out empty, they can crush us and call us careless. Threx looked at Luca then, not at Naira. You wanted proof. You have it. What now? Luca took one more look at the access strip and saw the detail that tightened the whole case. The authorization line did not carry a name, but the command tier matched the level Varrock Thorn used at the control side consoles, and too few people on the floor had reason to touch route overrides in the middle of an active inter-team test. He still kept his wording disciplined because he did not want the group drifting into assumptions they could not defend. Now we survive the route and put this in Captain Holt's hands before anyone tells us what story to repeat. Naira sealed the panel cover back into place, just enough to preserve what they had found without pretending to repair it. Then she clipped her wrist pad to her chest strap and stepped to Luca's side instead of the middle of the group. It was a small movement, but everyone in the room understood what it meant. Naira was no longer neutral. At the transfer chamber ahead, Luca's goal became brutally simple again. He needed all 5 of them out together. The proof in Naira's pad meant nothing if the group broke apart there, and Threx was seconds away from doing exactly that because his pride had turned into reckless urgency. They left the maintenance bay through a side hatch and entered a vertical transfer chamber wrapped around a lift shaft with rotating bridge segments. The chamber used timed bridge plates that swung in and out to connect ring walkways at different heights. In training mode, they moved slow and predictable. Now the plates were cycling too fast. Luca saw the bad rhythm in one glance and raised a hand. Stop. Wait one full cycle and read it. Threx brushed past him before the sentence finished. We have already waited enough. He hit the first bridge segment on the half pulse and made it across by raw speed, then lunged for the second plate as it started to retract. The metal edge dropped under his lead foot. He caught the side rail with both hands and slammed chest first into the frame, one leg dangling into the gap while the plate cycled away below him. Pell shouted his name. Kale took one step forward and froze because the next plate timing was wrong and the path to Threx was not stable. Naira swore under her breath and looked to Luca, not because she needed permission to care, but because she knew he was already reading the cycle. Threx clung to the rail with both arms, teeth bared in effort. The mockery he used to wear was gone. He looked like a cadet one bad slip away from disappearing into a machinery gap. Pell's voice shook. Leave him. We cannot all get stuck because of him. Kale's hands hovered over the rail controls, torn between rules and fear. Priority should be stable route first. Luca had enough reasons to let Threx deal with his own choice. Threx had humiliated him in front of the academy, tried to bury him in every exercise, and nearly ruined Pell's rescue with brute force. Luca turned back anyway. He moved to the chamber edge and watched the bridge pattern for 2 cycles, reducing it to timing and motion instead of anger and history. Threx, listen to me, he called. I can get you back, but you have to follow exactly. Threx's grip slipped a fraction, then recovered. He looked up at Luca with a face full of shock and strain. Why? Luca answered without heat. Because we are leaving with 5. Naira was already at his side. Tell me where. Left anchor rail, Lucas said. When I say, you lock my belt to the post and hold tension. Kale, I need the manual bridge touch on the lower panel. Do not chase the light. Wait for my count. Kale nodded hard, finally anchored by a concrete task. Pell backed off the edge, but stayed where he could hand tools if called. Luca clipped a short line from the emergency rack to his harness and passed the free. Locked to Naira. Then he dropped to one knee at the rail and watched the moving plates below Threx. The pattern was not random. It was a staggered repeat with one early cut every third swing, the same kind of manipulated rhythm they had seen in the corridors. He pointed at the lower panel. Kale, you are not opening a route. You're buying me one extra breath on the bridge. Tap once on my mark only. Kale swallowed. Got it. Luca leaned over the rail, caught Threx's forearm when the next plate rose near enough, and spoke fast and hard so Threx had something stronger than panic to hold on to. On my count, you swing your right leg to the side rung. Not up. Side. Then you push with your left arm, and I pull. Threx nodded once, jaw tight. The bridge plate rose. Luca counted the beat from the relay pulse he could see in the chamber wall reflection. Now leg. Hold. Call. Top. Naira. Tension. Kale hit the manual touch. The bridge hesitated for a fraction of a second. Just enough. Naira set the line tight against Luca's harness and braced her full weight backward. Luca hauled on Threx's forearm while Threx swung his leg to the rung and kicked off the frame. For one ugly second, Threx's boot scraped and slipped. Then his knee caught the rung, and Luca dragged him across the lip with Naira's line, taking the worst of the load. They collapsed onto the walkway in a loud tangle of gear and breathing. No one spoke at first. Threx rolled to his side, then sat up slowly with both hands on the floor as if checking that the metal under him was real. He looked at Luca with a stunned expression Luca had never seen on him before. It was not humiliation that time. It was the shock of being spared by someone he had treated as expendable. You came back, Threx said, voice raw. Luca stood and unclipped the line. You were in the way if I did not. It was the driest thing he had said all day, and even Pell let out a short, disbelieving breath that almost sounded like a laugh. The tension broke just enough for the group to move again. Threx got to his feet and did not argue when Luca called the next route. He only nodded and followed. When the group reached the control side recovery zone, Luca's goal changed one last time for the day. Getting out alive was no longer enough. He had to stop the incident from being buried under the Academy's reputation before the story hardened against them. The recovery zone sat beyond a final inspection hatch and opened into a broad service court near the lower control offices. Med staff moved toward Pell and Threx for quick checks, and two Academy officials in dark training coats arrived almost at once with tablets ready and calm voices already shaped for damage control. One of them looked at the group and spoke to the room at large, not to any one cadet. The exercise experienced a variance in environmental sequencing. We will log this as a training irregularity pending review. Luca heard the wording and felt the trap in it. Variance made it sound small. Irregularity made it sound accidental. Pending review sounded like a door that could close before they reached it. Naira was at his side before anyone could separate them for statements. She touched the strap over her wrist pad once, a silent reminder that the proof was still in hand. Captain Saris Holt crossed the floor from the control stairs with a pace that told Luca she had already seen enough to be angry and was deciding where to put it. She stopped in front of the group, eyes moving from Pell's limp to Threx's scraped gear to Luca's face. What happened in the lower routes? She asked. The official in the dark coat tried to answer for them. Captain Holt, we are collecting cadet impressions after a sequence variance. Luca stepped forward before the adult voices could lock the frame around them. He kept it short because he knew long speeches sounded weak in moments like that. This was not a variance, he said. The route was manually altered during an active test. The service court went still in a way that had nothing to do with silence and everything to do with risk. Saris looked at him for one beat, then at Naira. Do you have proof? Naira unstrapped her wrist pad and placed it in Saris Holt's hand. Fresh panel tamper marks. Local service cache. A route override accepted on training command tier during the run. We also found an emergency escape route locked early with a mechanical pin. The official reached toward the pad. That device should be turned over through standard review channels. Saris did not hand it back. She read fast, then opened the attached images and the copied lines. Luca could not see the screen from where he stood, but he watched Saris's expression change from controlled anger to something colder and more focused. She lifted her head and spoke so everyone in the court could hear. The safety threshold was exceeded in an active cadet exercise. The words landed harder than anything else said that day because they were precise and impossible to dress up. The official tried again. Captain, with respect, this requires internal handling before public academic notice. Saris turned toward the control stairs where more staff were gathering. No, she said. It requires a formal record before anyone edits the language. She looked back at Luca, then at the rest of the team, including Threx, who now stood half a step behind Luca without seeming to notice he had done it. All 5 of you will remain available for testimony. No private debriefs until this is logged. Kale exhaled slowly like he had been holding air since East Relay Corridor. Pell stared at the floor and then at Luca, processing the fact that the day might end as a hearing instead of an expulsion. Naira folded her arms, steady and unreadable. Threx met Luca's eyes and gave a small nod that held more weight than any apology he could have said in front of the staff. Across the court, a wall display changed from final evaluation schedule to a new notice. The console displayed a line that read, Scholastic Review Chamber convening for emergency inquiry. Luca read it once and felt the ground shift under the story everyone had been trying to force onto him since he arrived at Ironcrest. He had come to survive the academy and avoid being pushed out in silence. Now he was walking into a public chamber with evidence in play, witnesses at his side, and people above him who would rather that day disappear. There was no quiet way back from that. The waiting room outside the Scholastic Review Chamber felt too clean for a day like that. Lucas sat on a narrow bench under a pale wall light and watched reflections move across the floor as students gathered in the hall. Beyond the glass, he knew why he was there and what he had to do. He was not there to win an argument or get even with anyone, only to say what he saw and help the truth stay simple enough that no one could bury it under polished words. Naira stood near the door with her arms folded, reading the room instead of the wall display. Kale stayed upright and rigid beside her, while Pell kept shifting his weight and rubbing one hand against his sleeve as if his body still remembered the crush of the transfer gap. Luca had asked them for one thing and one thing only before they came in. Keep the order of events straight, keep it short, and do not guess beyond what each of them saw. The second lock jammed before Threx hit it. Lucas said quietly, looking from one face to the next. Say that if they ask. Then say what happened after. Naira gave a small nod. I will. Kale exhaled through his nose. I know what I saw. Pell swallowed and glanced toward the chamber doors. If they push hard, Luca looked at him. Then say you do not know what you did not see. That answer settled Pell more than a longer speech would have. It gave him a narrow line to walk, and narrow lines were easier than courage in the abstract. The hall outside grew louder for a moment, then dipped into a hush. Students were making space for someone important, and Luca did not need to turn to know who it was. Provost Malencross passed the glass with 2 chamber aides and did not look in. Her pace was calm and exact, like the room was already decided and everyone else was only moving through a procedure. A few breaths later, another shape stopped at the door instead of passing it. Threx Anchor stood there alone, shoulders filling the frame, the bruised pride in his face sharper than any mark on his body. Naira's eyes narrowed first. Kale stiffened. Pell looked away. Threx tapped once on the glass, then opened the door halfway. I need 1 minute. No one moved, so Lucas stood and stepped forward. He left the others by the bench and stopped close enough to hear without making the whole room lean in. What? Luca asked. Threx kept his voice low, but the effort showed. I was wrong. Luca said nothing. He let Threx use the silence if he meant it. I thought you were trying to make us look bad from day one, Threx said. I thought you were scared and hiding it behind clever talk. In the vault, you could have left me there. Luca watched his face, not his words. For the first time since they met, Threx was not performing for a crowd. I know, Lucas said. Threx gave one hard nod. I saw Thorn at the manual panel before we went down. I did not think it mattered then. I should have said it sooner. You can say it in there, Lucas said. Threx looked past him at the others, then back. I will. He closed the door before anyone could answer, and the room went quiet again. Pell looked stunned. Kale looked like he was reordering half the world in his head. Naira gave Luca a brief glance. You did not ask him for that. No, Luca said. He chose it. A chamber aide opened the inner door and called their names. Luca felt the tension tighten in his chest, but it was a clean tension now, the kind that came before work. He rose, smoothed the front of his academy jacket once, and walked in without rushing. He did not feel small in that moment, only focused. The Scholastic Review Chamber was built to make every voice feel measured. Tiered seats rose in a wide arc, chamber members high above the floor, and rows of students filled the lower gallery where the sound of breathing seemed louder than whispers. Luca saw the whole course watching, including students who had laughed at him in the yard. He did not try to read their faces one by one because that would pull him away from the only task that mattered. Captain Saris Holt stood to one side of the floor-level platform, hands behind her back, posture steady. Instructor Varek Thorne stood opposite her near the chamber rail, composed on the surface and very careful with where he put his eyes. Luca knew the shape of the pressure before the first question arrived. The room was ready to turn the case into discipline and ask whether he had overstepped, not whether the vault had been pushed past safe limits. A chamber member with silver markings on her collar leaned forward. Cadet Luca Mercer, you assumed command functions during an active team assessment. What? Luca kept his voice even. Because Pell was trapped, the route system was failing, and the team was losing time arguing. I gave short tasks so we could get him out and move. Another member spoke before the first sat back. Were you the designated team lead? No. Then you broke protocol. Luca heard a stir in the gallery and let it pass. He had expected that line, and he had no reason to fight the wording. I acted when the assigned decisions were making the situation worse, he said. We were in a training space that was behaving like a real hazard. Waiting would have trapped more people. Varek Thorne finally stepped in, voice smooth and almost patient. The vault simulation includes stress deviations by design. Cadets often mistake difficulty for malfunction, especially when under pressure. Luca turned his head toward him and answered the chamber, not the instructor. I reported pattern repeats across multiple sessions before the team assessment. The same kinds of route changes kept appearing in ways that favored some groups and hurt others. A few heads lifted in the gallery. That part had been rumored before. Hearing it said in the chamber changed the air. A chamber member gestured. State what you observed without interpretation. Luca nodded once. Doors in the lattice runs closed early on repeated paths. Obstacle timing repeated in the same order on days it was marked random. In the rescue drill, a side door opened out of sequence and created a trap line near a transfer gap. He paused long enough to breathe, then kept going. During the large team assessment, I saw Instructor Thorne use a manual control panel before our group entered the deeper level. Later, the same kind of abnormal sequence happened again. The chamber did not erupt, but it shifted. Varek's posture did not change much, yet Luca caught the tiny delay before he answered. Manual checks are routine, Varek said. Cadets are not trained to interpret control actions. Luca met the chamber's gaze again. I am not interpreting the controls. I am describing the timing I saw before the route changed. That landed harder than a louder sentence would have. It kept the facts where they belonged and denied the room a chance to paint him as dramatic. The questions kept coming, but they changed shape. They asked where he stood, who moved first, how close Pell was to the transfer seam, how many warnings he gave, and in what order the team responded. Luca answered with short lines and plain words. He did not try to sound smart, and he did not defend his pride because pride was not the issue. When one member pressed him on discipline again, Luca gave the clearest answer he had carried into the room. I did the only thing in front of me that could bring people out alive. If the system had worked normally, I would have followed the lead and stayed in my lane. The room went very quiet after that. It was not a dramatic silence, only the kind that comes when the center of the argument moves and everyone knows it. Captain Saris Holt stepped forward when the chamber chair called for her. Her voice was steady, and unlike Varek's, it did not seem built for impression. I reviewed the vault's safety thresholds after the incident, she said. The deviations in that assessment exceeded the approved training band. That is not a matter of cadet stress perception. The logs and hardware state both support that conclusion. Luca did not look at Varric then. He watched the chamber members instead, because that was where the balance of power lived in the room. One of them asked Saris whether the deviations could still qualify as routine irregularity. Saris answered without heat. No, a routine irregularity does not produce that cluster of sequence failures in a live cadet lane while a student is physically pinned. That sentence stripped away the last easy exit. Luca felt it happen in the room the way he had felt a lock disengage in the vault. Varric started to speak again, but the chair lifted a hand and cut him off. You will respond after witness statements from the remaining cadets. Luca let out a slow breath he had not realized he was holding. He had not won anything yet, but the case could no longer be folded into a small procedural note and forgotten. By the time Threx was called, the chamber had already heard Naira, Kale, and Pell confirm the sequence of the trap and the rescue. Each of them had stayed close to what Luca asked, and that restraint made their words stronger then. Anger would have. Naira described the altered module marks in plain terms and explained only what they meant in practice. Someone had changed settings they should not have changed, and the changes made the route unsafe in a way the team could feel on the floor. Kale admitted he had dismissed Luca's warnings earlier in the term and that he now believed those warnings matched what happened in the vault. Pell spoke with a shaking voice at first, then steadied when he reached the part where Luca came back for him instead of pushing forward for points. The gallery listened differently after that. Luca could feel it without turning much. People were no longer watching for a spectacle. They were listening for where the truth would land. Then Threx stood. He looked almost uncomfortable in the witness position, which Luca had never seen before. Threx was built for open space and direct contests, not for measured words under chamber lights. The chair asked for his statement, and for a moment Threx only stared at the rail in front of him. Luca did not help him with a look or a nod. If this was going to matter, it had to come from Threx without being carried. When the assessment started, I did not trust Luca, Threx said. I thought he was trying to control the team without earning it. A few students shifted in the gallery, hearing their own opinions out loud. Threx did not glance back at them. I pushed him out of the route decisions, he continued. I also tried to force a lock with impact when the lane jammed. That made the mechanism bind harder. The words came rough, but they came. Luca saw the chamber members leaning in now, not because the language was polished, but because it was costly. Threx lifted his head and looked straight at the chair. Luca warned us to stop. He changed the plan fast and gave clear tasks. He pulled Pell out. Later he came back for me when I got trapped trying to take the upper lane. The room held still around that line. Threx swallowed once. He had reason to leave me. He did not. Luca felt the weight of that more than the earlier apology in the waiting room. This was not private anymore. This was a public surrender of ego in front of the entire academy. A chamber member asked the question Luca had been waiting for. Did you observe any staff action relevant to the route changes before your team entered the lower levels? Threx's jaw tightened. He was scared then, not of Luca, but of saying something that could hit a superior. Yes, he said at last. I saw Instructor Thorne at a manual panel near the deep lane controls. He was adjusting something before we were sent in. Varric moved immediately. Cadet Anchor is not qualified to characterize technical procedures. Threx turned toward him before the chair could speak. His voice was louder now, anger finally breaking through, but he kept it on the event and not on insults. I am characterizing what I saw. You were at the panel, and the route changed after. The chair struck the rail once for order. The sound snapped across the chamber and held. Luca watched Varric then and saw the first real crack in his composure. It was small, a tightness at the corners of his mouth, but it was enough. The chamber moved quickly after that. Questions shifted away from Luca and toward staff authority, access rights, and oversight. Luca was no longer the center of the threat. He was a witness who had endured the threat and survived it. That change hit the gallery harder than any speech. Luca heard no laughter then, no stage whisper, and not even the careless rustle that usually followed Threx's movements. When the chair announced that the chamber was initiating a formal inquiry into training interference and unsafe deviation, the words landed like weather breaking. Not loud, not flashy, but final in the way that mattered. Luca did not feel triumph. He felt something simpler and stranger than that. Relief, maybe, and a kind of distance from the version of the day that could have happened if Pell had not been pulled free and if everyone had kept choosing pride over truth. As the hearing recessed, students in the gallery stared at him openly. The looks were different now, but Luca did not linger in them. He turned first to Pell to make sure he was steady, then to Naira, then to Kale. Threx was last, and Threx held his gaze for a moment before giving one short nod that meant more than any speech in that room. By the next training cycle, the hearing had already changed the air at Ironcrest. Stormglass Yard opened under a sky that looked scrubbed clean by high wind, and the clear barrier panels gleamed in bands of pale blue, while cadets assembled in lines that were just a little quieter than before. Luca stepped onto the yard with the same goal he had on his first day. Learn, survive, and earn his place through work. The difference was not in him. It was in the space around him. Conversations did not stop completely when he passed, but the tone changed. Some students watched with curiosity, some with caution, and a few still with old habits they were not ready to lose. Yet none of them tried to make him a public target. Naira joined him near the lane markers without fanfare. Kale came a moment later and asked if Luca wanted to compare route options before the drill, which sounded so normal Luca almost laughed at the strangeness of it. Pelt arrived carrying his own gear instead of trailing the stronger group and gave Luca an awkward half grin. I checked the lane map twice this time. Luca nodded. Good habit. From the opposite side of the yard, Threx walked over with a measured pace that would have looked impossible a week earlier. He stopped in front of Luca, not crowding him, and looked him in the eye. I am running impact lane today, Threx said. If you see a bad sequence, call it. I will listen. Luca let a beat pass, then gave him the same level tone he used in the vault. Then we will move faster. That earned the first dry laugh Threx had made around him without an edge. It was brief and surprised, and it eased something in the group without turning the moment into a joke. Provost Malin Cross appeared on the elevated platform above the yard with Captain Saris Holt at her side. The lines tightened as cadets straightened, and the wind tugged at uniforms while the provost began the announcement. Her voice carried cleanly over the yard. She stated that the preliminary inquiry had found sufficient grounds to suspend Instructor Varek Thorne from active training duty, pending formal review, and that oversight procedures for simulation control would be changed immediately. No one cheered. Ironcrest was not that kind of place, but the silence that followed was not empty. Luca heard it for what it was: a whole institution adjusting to the fact that rank had not protected the truth that time. Then Malin added one more item. Luca listened carefully because his name was already moving through the lines before she said it. Cadet Luca Mercer would remain in the main program and receive provisional placement in a field response training group under Captain Saris Holt's supervision. Placement would be reviewed by performance, not reputation. Luca felt every eye on him again, but this time he did not feel pinned by it. He felt seen, and there was a difference. He did not raise a hand or say anything to the yard. He only took one breath, squared his stance, and looked toward the training lanes where the next drill was about to begin. Captain Saris Holt came down from the platform after dismissal while groups broke formation. She stopped beside Luca as if they were discussing a routine schedule change. You handled the chamber well, she said. Luca kept his eyes on the yard. I told the truth. That is harder than people pretend, Saris said. She watched Threx and the others gathering at the lane start. You also kept the team intact when it mattered. Luca glanced at her then. What does field response training actually mean here? Saris gave the smallest hint of smile. It means you train where mistakes feel more like weather and less like school. She let that sit for a moment, then added the part that made Luca's focus sharpen all over again. There is a supervised exercise being proposed beyond the academy perimeter on a freight relay ridge outside Ironcrest. New terrain, new variables, different kind of pressure. Luca looked back at the yard, at the students who no longer laughed when he stepped into a lane, at the wide sky over Vastmere that suddenly felt larger than the walls around the academy. That sounds real enough, he said. Saris nodded once. Good. Keep that attitude. The lane's signal chimed, and the next drill opened. Luca moved to position with Naira, Kale, Pell, and Threx, not as friends yet, and not as something simple, but as a team that had seen what pride cost and what clear action could save. No one made space for him because they pitted him now. They made space because they expected him to use it well. When Luca stepped onto the line, Stormblast Yard went quiet around his lane for one brief beat. He felt the silence and recognized it before the horn sounded. It was not contempt. It felt like respect. Luca kept his eyes on the route lights and let that feeling pass through him without holding it too tightly. What mattered now was the work in front of him, the people beside him, and the next call he would have to make when the lane turned difficult. He had not become the strongest cadet in the yard, and he did not need to be. He knew what he could do under pressure, and now other people knew it too. The signal changed. Luca leaned forward with the team, ready to move. If this story stayed with you, if it gave you something to think about, or if you want to see where Luca's path leads next, please like the video, share it with someone who loves science fiction, and subscribe to the channel. Your support helps bring more stories like this to life, one world at a time. And if you do subscribe, stay close. The next mission may begin far beyond the Academy walls.